Hello, friends, participants all over the world. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce to you today three of the most important living leaders of the Theosophical Society. And I also get to interview all three of them afterwards. So let us start with Mr. Tim Boyd. Many of you already know him, some personally, some from his online lectures or from his writings, the presidential addresses in every Theosophist, and as translations in all the magazines of the sections worldwide. For all the others, I would like to introduce him briefly. Mr. Tim Boyd, International President of the Theosophical Society. Tim was born in New York City. In the University of Chicago, he was an honors graduate with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Public Affairs. He is now living in Chicago and Adyar, Chennai, southern India. Tim joined the Theosophical Society in America in 1974 at a very young age. In 2007, he became president of the Theosophical Order of Service in the United States of America, and he was elected president of the TS in America in 2011 and again in 2014. In April 2014, he was also elected international president of the Theosophical Society Adyar and re-elected in 2021 for the next 7 years. He shares his time between the headquarters of the TS Adyar in Chennai, and before the pandemic, he regularly traveled to TS sections around the world. Tomorrow, you will have the opportunity to meet him online again during his public lecture, A Life Within a Life. And we go on with Mrs. Deepa Padhi, Vice President of the Theosophical Society. Dr. Deepa Padhi is a retired professor of philosophy from Bhubaneswar, Odisha, who has written a book on the ethical philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. In 2015, she had edited and published articles on women issues in the book Yes, She Can. How interesting, especially for female theosophists. Moreover, she writes articles on social, philosophical, theosophical, and spiritual issues for magazines and journals. Deepa is a founding and executive member of Drashtidan, an eye bank organization for cornea transplants and research, as well as a life member of Indian Red Cross Society Odisha chapter. These are only two examples of her rich social welfare commitment. Dr. Deepa Padhi joined the Theosophical Society in 1994 and is presently the secretary of the Deepapi Lodge, Bhubaneswar. She joined the Theosophical Order of Service in 2006, and in 2016, she became the president of TOS Odisha. Deepa believes in practical theosophy, which to her is spiritual self-transformation and service. Very good. In April 2017, she was unanimously elected for vice president of the Theosophical Society. In 2013, Dr. Deepa Padhi spoke on transformational practices at the Summer National Convention of the TS in America. While there, she attended the International Conference of the TOS. That means many of our US members know her already personally, and Indian, of course. And it means she will be a competent interview partner today, too. And our third panelist, Mr. Charlton Jules Romero, called Chally. It's more easier. Chally is the General Secretary of the Theosophical Society in the Philippines. Chally is a third-generation Theosophist and is currently the National President and General Secretary of the TS of the Philippines. He is chairman of the Board of Trustees of Golden Link College Foundation, a theosophical school with various campuses all over the Philippines. He is also chairman of the Theosophical Order of Service Philippines and Green Earth Foundation Incorporation. And last but not least, he is also vice president of the TS Indo-Pacific Federation. Chally is a lawyer and law professor in various universities and colleges and also holds an MBA, a Master of Business Administration. Since years, Chally organizes weekly online meetings with lectures and meditations that have numerous regular listeners worldwide. So I could say that many of you already know him too. Well, let's start with the questions. The audience must be quite curious already. Our first question goes to Tim. Everyone has difficulties in their life, and these last couple of years have been especially difficult. What aspect of the Theosophical teachings have been most helpful to you in difficult times?
Thank you, Manuela, for the introduction, and thank you for posing the question as well. I think very often when we are involved in such a thing as a consideration of the ageless wisdom, or when it becomes something very meaningful in our lives, we think in terms of the various teachings and their applications. Throughout the ageless wisdom body of knowledge, there are many, many things we can point to. But when we're talking specifically about this pandemic experience, obviously it's something that's been very difficult, not just in terms of losses of people that we know or illness to ourselves and others. Just in talking to people within the Theosophical Society itself, one of the things that I think was very difficult for many was the initial phase where there was such isolation from others. I think as human beings, we look for connections, we require connections. And so particularly for people who were alone, whose children may have left the house, it was something that was extremely difficult. Whether you know the teachings about meditation, or whether you know about all the various aspects of the personality, it still posed significant problems. I was fortunate in my isolation phase in that I was isolated with my family. For some, that's less fortunate than for others. I have said that it's a wonderful thing to be in isolation with people that you love, but it also helps to like them. So I had both things going. But I think for me, the most, if you could call it a teaching, the most profound help during all of this was this whole idea, practice, just fact of the value of love. That's something that when we can recognize it and when we can transmit that, it's something that has been a blessing really throughout this pandemic experience. The idea that we are connected, even if we're not physically in each other's presence, but we're connected, and through the thoughts that we carry for one another, the Zoom and Skype calls that we make to one another, these sorts of connections took a different form, but it was all based on this unifying power of love. And so if I had to choose something as a teaching or aspect of the ageless wisdom, that would be it. That to the extent that we can realize love in our lives, it has a magnificent effect on us and on others and the broader world as well.
Thank you, Tim. Would you share your thoughts with us, Deepa, please?
Yes. Thank you, Manuela, for your introduction to me. I would like to say in general, I'm not bringing now pandemic situation. In general, well, I would say it is the law of karma. In reality, there is no injustice. As you sow, so you reap. We get exactly what we deserve, good or bad. Therefore, we need to accept whatever comes our way, even if it is a challenging situation, acceptance of situations, good or bad, with an equable mind also helps us in our spiritual evolution. That is what I want to share.
It's fine. Very interesting. Thank you. And Chally?
Thank you very much, Manuela. When the question was posed, I was trying to look back at the situation of our Philippine section just before the lockdown in March of 2020. And the Sunday, immediate Sunday before the lockdown, we were in fact conducting our national strategic planning with all of the lodge presidents, study group heads present. And yes, we had that strategic planning and outputs, particularly with respect to the study of the ancient wisdom. And a few days later, we had a lockdown, and all of the assumptions of that strategic planning were thrown out of the window. So much so that when we talk about ask about theosophical teachings, I realized that most of these were academic head knowledge. And suddenly, when we had that weekly joint lodge meetings, there was always that question in the open forum connecting the pandemic with a particular topic of a lecture. And I realized that there is, in fact, difficulty connecting the ancient wisdom with what we are actually experiencing in this physical world at this time of our respective evolution. So it has been a year of learning, and as it is, as Tim mentioned, we suddenly realize that there are equally opportunities brought about by this pandemic. Despite the lockdowns, we have connected with each other. Although virtually, I wouldn't have met some members in Africa, in New Zealand, if it weren't for these online meetings. But I must assure you that there are still holdouts who still refuse to join or even provide lectures through these Zoom meetings. But we are able to realize that we can still connect, that human need for a connection, even though virtually, is very important. So much so that I may have bitten more than I could chew when we started with these joint lodge meetings. It was weekly, just to keep members busy. And suddenly, we had different variants. The pandemic has been extended. So each week is an event in itself, inviting, but it has connected all of us. But we also realize that although we are weathering the same storm or hurricane, we ride different boats. Some of us are on yachts, are on cruise liners. Some of us are floating on mere canoes. Some of us need to be thrown a lifesaver. And Deepa is into women's welfare. I realized that during this lockdown, and there are some prevalent cases here, that there is domestic abuse. So we learn from this experience, and it is in this light that we try to seek the application of theosophical teachings in this experience of ours, in this pandemic. So the death, karma, reincarnation, because death has been very real in all households. I lost my father last July 2020, not because of the virus, but because of the difficulty going to a hospital and getting a simple medical procedure. So it is in this light that we embrace, in fact, this experience that we are going in the light of various theosophical teachings, which we should find ourselves fortunate having realized some of these theosophical teachings in our lifetime.
So good to be a theosophist, isn't it? Or to know such a thing like theosophy. Thank you. Let's go to question number 2. Many of our participants do not know that Vice President Dr. Deepa Padhi published a very interesting book last year called Corona Pandemic, Challenge and Lessons. The subject of this book is exactly what concerns us most as theosophists about the corona crisis. Dear Deepa, can you tell us some important key thoughts from the book and explain them briefly? Challenges and lessons is exactly what we all need to know. Please.
Thank you, Manuela, for giving me this chance to say something about my edited book. In the first year of the pandemic, I was confronted with two opposite emotions. When I thought about my human family suffering and dying all over the world, I really felt disturbed and sad. But looking at the nature, I experienced blissful joy and peace within. It gave me a feeling that the pandemic is not all negative. Rather, there are many aspects which are meant for us to learn. This led me to compile the different perspectives of the pandemic, written by luminaries from different walks of life from India and across the world. There are chapters from different standpoints like scientific, philosophical, spiritual, theosophical, economic, environmental, educational, political, social, that includes violence against women during pandemic, and also the views of multinational corporate CEOs. Their analysis will be of immense value during the COVID and post-COVID time for the coming generation. I'll share with you 5 key points of the many, as it is a compilation of 58 articles. Number 1 is, arrogant humans always think too great of themselves. But there is a tiny microorganism called coronavirus that turned the human kingdom upside down. This reveals the truth that all are equal. There is nothing low or high, small or big. The earth is an ecosystem that rules and maintains itself. Imbalance in it will definitely cause disaster. Number 2, it is for the first time that we all are experiencing the Upanishadic saying of Vasudeva Kutumbakam as members of one human family. Though people are residing in their respective homes, one feels a deep sense of togetherness during this pandemic. This gave us the courage and hope for joining together to resolve the problem of coronavirus. Third, humanity should learn a lesson from his own greed, pride, selfishness, jealousy, misplaced ambitions, and abuse of various types. These are the causes accumulated over a long period of times. They have become a part of our prarabdha karma. It had to explode one day, and it did happen in the form of coronavirus. These challenges are our own doings, and therefore we have to resolve them through suffering. Then fourth is, we need to understand that nature is our mother, our source, as well as resource. We have no right to exploit it for our pleasure. The value of other life forms are equally valuable as ours. It is time to understand the value of harmonious coexistence with all life forms on this planet. Therefore, there is urgent need to change our erroneous perception of ourselves and that of the world around. Next, fourth point, for the last 1.5 years, the religious institutions had been closed. Still, the world continued. It goes to show that God, in fact, resides within. If one wants to know God or pray, one should go within. I think the time has come for all to turn to spiritualism. This is the time for reviving our value system and create collective consciousness towards love, empathy, compassion, the joy of giving and serving.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Chally, I think you could share with us some thoughts too.
Well, middle of last year, I was surprised when I received an email from Deepa asking me to write an article for this book that she was editing. And of course, Deepa is quite a taskmaster. She had a deadline set, and this was very early during the pandemic. So much so that I wasn't sure what I was supposed to write about. If I recall correctly, I wrote something about crisis management, but of course, nobody was an expert on a pandemic, much less the coronavirus at that time. So I was shooting blindly, and I complied with the requirement of Deepa, and I wasn't sure, but I felt that Deepa was onto something important. And later on, I got my hands on the book, which she edited and published. I think that was during the latter part of last year. And when I looked, it contained different articles from different people, and Deepa just now summed up everything. So it is quite a useful resource, because it is a snapshot at the time of the pandemic, at its earlier stage, so much so that there are already learnings synthesized by Deepa just now. But I am now encouraged to have a volume number 2, because right now, looking back at my article and having experienced all of these developments brought about by the pandemic, the grief, the joy, the opportunities brought about by the pandemic, I would say that maybe I have something to contribute deeper in an article. That first article of mine was brought about by an ignorance of a pandemic, but now having matured, so to speak, and experiencing a lot of events, raw events that you wouldn't even encounter during a normal lifetime, has deepened one's understanding of life, of the teachings of the ancient wisdom, of human relations, and a lot of these things mentioned by Deepa, very enlightening. So with much reluctance when I accepted that assignment, now I feel privileged to have contributed something to that effort.
I'm sure it's a privilege and a wonderful one. Thank you. So next question, Tim, that's for you. Even though many may not want to hear it anymore, the pandemic lasts longer, despite a short-term easing. This seems to imply that the learning process is not yet over. What do you think we have to learn from the corona crisis?
Yeah. But corona is probably one of the most recent crises, but it just does seem that in many respects, what we talk about as living a life is in many respects the progressive meeting of progressive crises. I mean, from the age of an infant all the way up to the time of passing, there's one crisis after another. I think one of the lessons particularly that will be useful for us is first to recognize what I think was very largely the human response to this, and probably still is, which is to say that it somehow or another, it strikes a chord of fear within people, to the point that, fear for our loved ones, fear for ourself, uncertainty, these sorts of things tend to naturally rise up. And in many cases, it becomes like the dominant emotion, where if we go too deeply down that avenue, then it becomes sort of the opposite of even what we're looking for in life, where we're looking to separate ourselves from others, to build walls of protection around ourselves, to mask ourselves from others. And it's something that is a health requirement, yes, but it starts to take psychological roots. And those are the sorts of things that I do believe we have to be vigilant just to counteract. You behave intelligently, yes. But I think one of the challenges is to learn to create community in the face of influences that would push us toward division, toward separation. And so that's a challenge, of course. But I think it's one that, again, Chally, Deepa, both have mentioned difficulties of the pandemic, but also blessings of the pandemic. If we don't have a challenge, I think in a way it's unfortunate, but I think as human beings, we rise and are more responsive to crisis than we are to comfort. You would hope it would be the other way around. But we tend to mobilize our forces, focus our inner resources when faced with a need. This is a need, but it can also become something that can apply beyond just the corona moment. It's something that, what do we do to deal with these kind of the anxiety, perhaps? And many people have actually, it's become a growth industry on the internet, a variety of meditation apps. It's a growth industry. They've spread everywhere. And it's like a business model. It's everywhere you look. And this is a very good thing. But to continue that and to deepen it so that it's not just a matter of relaxation, it also becomes a matter of inner exploration for qualities and inner resources and treasures that don't become active until they become seen. And so it's only, it seems, when we're pushed to the wall that we actively draw on those things. So for that, this pandemic has been great.
Very interesting. Thank you. Very important. Do you have something to add, Deepa or Chally, to this question?
Yes, I can.
Yes,
say.
please.
We need to be ecologically conscious. This pandemic has taught us to be ecologically conscious, It taught us to have a harmonious coexistence with all forms of life on this planet, because as they all have right to live as much as we have, then we should learn to look beyond our own difficulties and pain to lend a helping hand to everyone who needs it, whether a friend or a foe. I would say, another point would be people have learned to live with less. We have realized that one could do without many things which were previously considered as necessities. Another is mental and emotional connectedness has emerged out of social and physical distancing during COVID. Still another is, it taught us to love and love all. That's
Fine, thank you. Chally?
I would agree with Tim that when our backs are pushed against the wall, then we are in fact compelled to adapt to these various changes that we face. Humans are averse to changes. They usually enjoy being in their comfort zones. And before the pandemic, people have been used to a life on the fast lane, not being able to step on the brakes. So this pandemic has pushed us on the wall, keep us quarantined. And I had this short article in our Philippine Theosophist newsletter of being alone but not lonely. People have been forced not to look outward, to reach out to other people, because others are also languishing, so to speak. So people are now forced to look inside them, draw within that inner strength, and maybe realize, as at least in the theosophical teachings, and again, that is our advantage, unique advantage of a theosophist, realizing that when they look within, maybe they find that divine spark, and acknowledging that that divine spark is present in all, and we are connected in that way, so much so that we need not look out physically, reach out physically, but introspectively, we realize the oneness, and that provides the impetus to maybe do some service work in spite of this pandemic. I must acknowledge that there are opportunities for service work, so long as one keeps his eyes or her eyes open to that opportunity.
That's it. Our next question, I think you are straight that way. So I will ask you, Chally, what describes the now in the dimension of consciousness?
Well, when we talk about consciousness, I do not pretend to be an expert on these topics, but I've been attending, again, taking advantage of the School of Wisdom online lectures. And again, I recall at the outset of this pandemic, Tim came out with a video assuring the members that what we are experiencing now is temporary. And I recall the statement of Linda Oliveira in her recent School of Wisdom talk together with Pedro, that anything that has a beginning has an end and is temporary. So much so that this now is actually temporary. what we have to focus on is, and when we talk about consciousness, something that is eternal, permanent, and that is why it is very important not to be too much drawn to this physical now of ourselves, but maybe tap that, veil the edges of the higher consciousness to have that realization of maybe the eternal.
Fine. What about you, Tim?
I'm glad you started with the tougher questions with Chally. I think it's only fair. I mean, these are, Manuela, your questions start to go into deep waters here. And well, we should. It's when we talk about now, probably that's not our normal experience. You would think it would be, because always we're here doing something. But I think generally, whenever we really start to look, the difficulties that we tend to face generally are rooted in some sort of psychological connection with the past or the future. It's always something pulling us in those directions. So, anything we have in the nature of resentments, things that we just cannot bring ourselves to forgive, grief, all of those things relate to something that is grabbing us out of the past. When we were talking just briefly about fears, anxieties. All of that is related to a future that is as much not here as this past is not. So, we're constantly drawn away from something that we can experience and sometimes do experience. I think, very often it's the case whereas when anyone becomes involved in a spiritual sort of direction, we're there because we're looking for something. And, we want things that we can hold on to, that we can sink our teeth into. But, a lot of the time, I think what we're looking for is something that, yes, there are great beings who have spoken about this. But it's also something that everyone has some experience of this now. And the sort of expansiveness and exalted aspect of what many overlook because they think it's a common experience. People who have had the experience of being intensely happy. Sometimes an example I like to use is something I use it because it's familiar, where probably most people at some point in their life have had the experience of standing somewhere and just watching the sun set or the sun rise, something like that. And you may be standing there and just watching, and you become so drawn into it that, there's no concern about the laundry. There's no concern about the neighbor who you think might have thought badly of you. You don't even know that, but you're thinking it. You are so rooted in the splendor or the beauty that's in front of you. When that moment passes, eventually the sun comes up or someone taps you on the shoulder and you're pulled out. And so, retrospectively, you would look and say, wow, in that moment, I was happy. I was peaceful. That's a description of the experience of the now. When people talk samadhi, they're talking some extension of that. But that's the now. And really it comes about, if you look at it, what makes it so possible for you to release the kind of boundaries and limits and defenses that protect you from these things normally? In that moment, for whatever reason, all of your thoughts about yourself have temporarily dropped away. And the experience of the now is the experience we describe as peace, happiness, joy. So the now, the layman's description of the now in consciousness is this sort of common experience we have with children, with sunsets, with puppies. I see cats all over the internet. So with cats too, kittens, cuddly things. So anyway, that's just a gloss on this idea of the now in consciousness.
Very nice. You explain it like, or I feel to be with you in that dimension. You with your hand on. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deepa. I'm sure you may contribute something too.
Yes. The reality of now can be understood in the context of fifth dimension of consciousness. The purpose of the fifth dimension of consciousness is the growth of soul, or you can say self-realization. And in this dimension, an evolved spiritual aspirant will always live in now with the capital N, that is in the present. It means being ever aware, ever alert. There would not be any past or future for him. Like Tim said, we experience that, but it is temporary. But for those evolved beings, it remains constant. They are always in now.
Very philosophically and theosophically. Thank you so much. Theosophical. Okay, so let's go to the next. How can we bring about the wholesomeness that is missing in us? Who would like to start?
I think
Deepa, go on. Please go on.
To have a wholesome life, we have to adopt a holistic health management system. It is a holistic management system which takes care of our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Spiritual includes moral as well, as you know. As balanced diet is needed for the physical body, positive thoughts are necessary for the mental and emotional health, and meditation is necessary for the soul or spiritual health. This is what I understand by wholesome living.
Very important. Thank you. Chally?
Yes. When I was contemplating on the question, I was thinking of wholesomeness from what Sister Deepa mentioned, but I was also thinking of maybe was it something more about making us complete, and my thoughts were brought to the first object of the society where we find the answer. It's not, and then the trail of thought brought me to that famous line in one of the early movies, I think in the 80s or 90s, where a famous actor said to his leading lady, "You complete me." So we do not find completeness in this physical world from material things or otherwise. So much so that realizing and experiencing the first object of our society is the path that we have to take to answer this tough question posed by Manuela.
Thank you, Chally. Thank you very much. And Tim, what about you?
But probably that's the challenge that's before us. That's one way of putting it. How do we become whole? Wholesomeness is kind of the quality of being whole. And, another word that says a similar thing is healing. Healing is the restoring the condition of wholeness. And, in order to accomplish something like that, much like Deepa said, there's a certain balance that is required. I know it was Saint Augustine who made the statement that for most people, complete abstinence is easier than perfect balance. So, to completely leave something alone is the approach very often, because it's an easier approach than a balanced approach. But I think one of the things that we have that is a gift is when we become conscious and when we start to find that, there is such a thing as an inner life. And as we start to become more familiar with the terrain of that through meditation or whatever our practices may be, we start to recognize that part of this whole journey is, first of all, it's all experimental. Just living a life is a remarkable experiment. And so we are constantly having to self-correct. The example Deepa gives of diet is just one of those very straightforward aspects that we have to deal with. The foods we feed our body, we'll eat one time and find it affects us badly. We alter, we move more toward balance. We don't tend to apply these same sort of dietary rules to our thoughts and emotions, which, we are constantly feeding ourselves by choice and otherwise from media sources and the books we read, the people we associate with. So, what is the diet that our body gets that leads toward wholesomeness? What is the diet of our thoughts that leads toward wholesomeness? And I think part of, how do we know when it's wholesome? And I think when we reach the point that we can distinguish what it is that increases our energy, increases our connection, increases our ability to reach out and to serve others, that's sort of a guideline for wholesomeness. Ideally, we have sort of a goal for ourselves of becoming as wholesome as possible. So as effective in our ability to serve others, as effective in our ability to be an instrument for higher thought, for energies that bring wholeness into our situations and into our lives. And those are sort of like the markers, I think, and the practice also of bringing a sense of wholesomeness that in many degrees, as you say in the question, is missing. And sometimes it seems as if the challenges of our moment cover it over even more so. So I think that's very important to think in this way.
So let's go to number 6. How can we elevate our self-oriented living style to a more expansive one? Deepa, would you like to answer us?
Yes. Well, in order to be more expansive in our lifestyle, we need to look beyond ourselves, meaning going beyond our limited individuality. It is important to understand that all living forms have only one common origin. Therefore, we are all connected and dependent on each other. If something affects one, others also get affected in some way or other. Therefore, one should cultivate love, compassion, and empathy within.
Would you like to add something, Tim, please?
Yeah, I would. In this sense, I think that with Deepa, she gave a short answer. But I have been with Deepa, walking around with her in the things that she does in the community in which she is rooted. And, very much so, this whole answer to the question about elevating our self-oriented style of living is a predominant feature of the way she walks, she talks. I mean, I don't want to brag about you too much, Deepa, but I do feel I have to say, she is involved in, I was with her for like 2 or 3 days. And in that time, the scope of the activity in which she is involved in helping others, in moving beyond self-oriented living, includes orphanages. It included working with people with handicaps. It included elderly people who, late stage in life and afflicted by poverty, various things to help them. Along the way, she also edits the occasional book. I don't know where she finds time, but these are the sorts of things that move toward. It's easier to get out of yourself when you can focus on the need and the suffering of others. And it's also a spiritual practice. So, I think Deepa is exemplary of that. And I didn't even talk about women's issues. And then, of course, Chally is active as well. I do think that maybe it's a bigger subject, but we talk about theosophy. And, depending on your temperament, your mind goes to a certain thing of this is theosophy. So for some, it goes directly to, the writings of HPB. For some, it goes to, various sorts of wisdom sources from other directions. For some, it goes straight to what can I do to help another? And I think in many ways, this particular panel of people have all been involved very, very profoundly in that sort of perspective of theosophy. And it's a practice as well as a service. The two aren't separable, is what I'm saying.
You're right. I did not know where to start and where to stop with her bio.
It goes on.
And she said, and I said, which to her is spiritual self-transformation and service, isn't it? That's Deepa. Please, Chally.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree very much. And what Tim mentioned, going around with Deepa for 2 days, I think it is focusing outside of our respective cocoons that we elevate ourselves. Let me take it in the context of education. First, from my perspective, I've taught in exclusive Christian Catholic schools where students are chauffeured. And then I've taught in schools where children are absent, scholars are absent because they have to do the house chores. They are the breadwinners, minor children, breadwinners for the family. So in that context, I also take the advantage to have our respective students immersed in different kinds of environment, such as I recall when I had my immersion program as a paralegal, there was once upon a time this garbage dump in the center of Metro Manila called the Smoky Mountain. It was a mountain because of all the garbage dumped there. And it was smoky because of the methane gases coming out of the decomposing garbage. And part of my immersion program was to experience the life of those dwelling on smoky mountains, because they were urban settlers with various, primarily they're from, at least from the legal perspective, were housing, shelter. So we were thrown by our mentors to be immersed in that environment. And we had to go through that mountain of garbage, so much so that I recall when I went home, my father asked our house help to burn all my clothes.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a learning experience, and I think immersing oneself, going around to other communities outside of your comfortable cocoon will provide that useful instruction, and hopefully spark that compassion.
Thank you, Chally. Thank you very much. Now, I don't know whether we have still time for another question. Perhaps we can answer briefly. In your opinion, are there ways to foster or accelerate the development of consciousness? If so, do you have any specific suggestion regarding authors, books, or exercises that might be helpful? Deepa, please. You are the author.
There are ways to accelerate the development of consciousness. But for that, one strong willpower and spiritual discipline is necessary. One has to prepare the ground through meditation, studies, and service, and then seek for a guide who has gone through the process and is self-realized. Sometimes masters help in a subtle way. This is my opinion.
Thank you. Tim?
I think there's not much more I could add to it than what Deepa said. I do think the idea of preparing the foundation is absolutely vital. I have known when you get in this thing and you're here involved for a while, you run across all sorts of things, but you have, many people just feel like you dive into a meditation practice, a breathing practice. But unless you have done the initial work of some degree of acquainting yourself with high thought, some degree of experimenting with quiet, and then the all-important aspect that puts it all into perspective, of course, is the service aspect. So, those basic building blocks, you continue with them, and as the foundation becomes more and more solid, then you find that there's all sorts of realizations that will just naturally come to you.
Thank you. Chally?
Sometimes I avoid that word accelerate. I would rather have things evolve as they should come naturally. I think what we have to emphasize, as mentioned by Sister Deepa and Brother Tim, is the preparation. I've encountered some people, how do we do astral projection? How do we move those kundalini and whatever? But I think the preparation part is should be underscored, and that is the first part in the golden stairs, a clean life. You don't simply open your chakras or whatever and do astral projection. You most of the time we fail to mention about that purification aspect, not only of the physical but the various levels of consciousness. So we have to live well that first part of the golden stairs, a pure life.
Thank you very much. And I found for closing two quotations of Charles Leadbeater. He's the one I think we can quotate here too. To hear the voice of the silence is to understand that from within comes the only true guidance. And the other one, our work as Theosophists is to help the whole forward, to push any part of the wheel. The life at all levels is the divine life. And if we are helping forward any part of that, we are helping the divine plan. Oh, my English, it's not better. May I thank you three, Tim, Deepa, and Chally, very much for your wonderful words, inspiring explanations, and personal experiences that you have shared with us. It was a great pleasure for me. And I also thank you, the audience, for your interest. Now it's time to hand over to President Tim Boyd. Please, Tim.
All right. Manuela asked that we might close with a brief meditation, so I will just ask you to sit comfortably in your seat or on the floor, wherever you are. If it's something that appeals to you, sometimes it is helpful to close the eyes and to just become aware of your breath, of the erectness of your spine, of your body. And very briefly, with that awareness, just the reminder that we are in one place, we are present in one time, we are here, we are now. And the fullness of all life, all consciousness is equally here and now. No need to reach, no need to look back. For a moment, let ourselves be present fully. Thank you. And thank you, Manuela, for guiding us through this process.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure for me. Thank you.